Hey, what's up friends, this is Alex, and today I want to show you one trick that I use in FL Studio to manage the position of my instruments in a very easy and visual way. Now, if you've checked out my tutorials in the past, you might have seen me use this X-Y-Z controller. If you didn't, pretty much I use this to determine where my instruments are playing. Check out what happens, for example, to this strings part as I move this dot around. Basically, the strings, the sound will follow this dot. If I move this dot closer to myself now, in the center, the strings will sound centric and close. If I move it far on the left and far, beyond me or far from me, it's gonna sound super reverberated, super atmospheric, not very close, and to the left. So they follow this dot. Now, in the tutorial I made last week about panning, mic positions, and reverb, I recommended against using panning for orchestral libraries, and I still recommend to not use it. Anyway, in this tutorial, I'm going to talk about concepts such as parallel reverb and mixer buses and routing, which I'm not going to explain again because I already talked about those in two tutorials. One called How to Use Reverb in Orchestral Music. Down below in the description, I'm going to leave a link to that tutorial there. If you didn't watch it, check it out so you understand what parallel reverbs are. And I also made a tutorial about mixer routing in orchestral music that is going to explain you how I, route my mixer, what group buses are and everything. And I'm going to mention that here today. So anyway, what I do to manage the reverb that way is use this. It's the X-Y-Z controller. Now, the X-Y-Z controller is nothing else other than a controller, which means it doesn't act. It doesn't have an impact on your song unless you link it to something. Okay? So that's what I did. And I'm going to show you how I did that. Now, pretty much, with the X-Y-Z controller, you have three controllers. That's what it's called, X-Y-Z. You have the X controller, which is the horizontal value of this dot. The Y is the, vertical value, and the Z, I'm not using it, it's this thing here. So we have three values we can link to anything. Now, the way in which I make this, I link this to the panning is I went here on the panning knob for my strings, mixer, bus, clicked on link to controller, and it opens that window. Then you have to select the internal controller you want to link it to. And as you see here, pretty much I have an XYZ controller for every single subgroup in my mixer. So you see there's many. So you have to look for the one that belongs to the strings channel, and it's written in parentheses, XYZ controller strings. So this is the one. We link the X parameter to the panning knob. So that now when we move this horizontally, it changes value and it will give the value to the panning knob. So when it goes to the left, the strings are playing left. When it goes to the right, they pan right. In the center, it's pan central, which is the position I always recommend to use for orchestral, top tier libraries. Now, for the positioning in terms of space, close or far, that's where I use parallel reverb. As I mentioned in the reverb tutorial, the more you send your strings to the master straight away, the more dry signal you send to the master compared to wet signal, the more close and less reverberated things will sound. The more wet signal you send, and compared to the dry signal, the less reverberated signal you get. So here I'm sending the strings to the dry and the wet channel, and for each of this, I link this to the Y parameter. Now, as you might have noticed here, I'm doing the same thing, link to controller, link to Y, but instead of doing input like this is the mapping formula, this is the normal formula you get. In this case, I have two different mapping formulas for the dry and the wet. So for the dry, I'm using 0.9 minus input multiplied by 0.9. Pretty much, I could have done this, minus input. Like 1 minus input would have given me the opposite shape in such a way that when I reduce this, when I set this value to 0, the value that is being sent here is actually the opposite, so it increases. This means the lower it is, the more dry signal I have. Although in terms, like I decided to add the 0.9, like this formula here, to limit how loud it can sound. You know, I didn't want it to go to the max. I wanted to go a little bit below. So if I do like 0.7 multiplied by 0.7, it becomes even smaller. So these mapping formulas, these are things you discover by reading the FL Studio manual. But pretty much that's the formula I use. 0.9 minus input multiplied by 0.9. This way, if it's lower, it will reach a maximum of 112% or something, which is good for me. Now, I also link the Y parameter to the wet knob. So the dry knob has that link, and the wet knob, I did link to controller. And, oh my God, the formula got overridden. Sorry, give me a second here. So in the wet knob, I went and I did link to controller. And I link it to the Y parameter of the strings. Now, when you do this, you link the same parameter twice to two different things. And you want it to act on two different things. At the same time, you have to click in here and disable remove conflicts. Because that's what happened now. Like I had it open, and when I linked the Y to the dry channel, it removed the link from the wet channel. So you remove conflicts needs to be off. Now, in this case, the input is okay if it's the normal direct direction, so I'm not doing minus input again, but I'm doing this, 0.35 plus input, this formula I found, again, by tweaking around, so that, you know, the minimum amount of input I would have is 0.35. You see, it starts here, ends here. So in this way, when I set the Y to the minimum amount, the dry channel doesn't go to the maximum, and the strings, like the reverb channel, the wet channel, doesn't go to 0, because I still want to have a minimum amount of reverb. If I didn't do that and just set, you know, input like this, when I set this to 0, it'll be 0 reverb, and I don't want that really, you know. So that's why I set the formula this way. You can find the formula that works for you, or you can use mine. You know, I like mine as it is. I'm gonna keep on using it like this. So I did this for every single, you know, like now when I move this, oh my God, it removed the link again. Okay, now if the links stop working, I guess like I just noticed now, if you tweak this manually, the link will stop working by itself. So if it stops working, you just have to relink it once again, and it will have an impact. Now, anyway, when I move the X, so the horizontal, I am tweaking the panning. When I move the Y, I am tweaking both the dry send and the wet send, based on the formulas I got. So when I'm down below, I got this ratio. When I'm high, I got the other ratio. Okay? So that's what happens, you know. It tweaks, like, because of how I linked it, it's gonna tweak the knobs. Now, why I'm using this instead of tweaking the knobs manually? Because this is visual. I have visual reference. Like, for example, if I'm mixing a song and I'm just doing it without the X-Y-Z controller and, you know, tweaking the string, like the reverb and everything, to remember how I exactly tweak the brass compared to the strings in the reverb, if I had to use knobs, I would just have to go and look at the values, and I would have to maintain the same ratio. It would be messy. That's how I used to do it in the beginning. But since I set my ratio the same for every single link, you know, for the brass, for the choir and everything, this graph here is a visual reference. So for example, now if I want my brass to be in the front because I want it to be super prominent, I can do this. And I want my strings to be below, you know, behind the brass. I know the brass is set as like 10% Y value, so the strings I can set them to 15%. And you see here as a visual reference where they are placed. Maybe I want my choir to be in the back. I will set it here. And now when I play it, I know that's how it's gonna sound. Maybe now I'm like, no, the choir wanted to be more defined. Well, I'm gonna make it less dry, you know, move it more like this, and now. So this is a very interesting thing to do. It saves you a lot of hassle because you see where everything is, and you can also pan the stuff. Although I don't really recommend it on orchestral instruments. Again, if you don't know why I say that, check out my tutorials about mic position, panning, and reverb. Also, of course, I did this X-Y-Z controller for every single instrument in my mixer routing, whatever, for the mixer groups, not for the single instruments. Like so, the keys, the strings, the brass, the choir, and everything. But if you don't want to do these links for yourself, I have this template saved, and you can use it yourself in your FL Studio if you have the latest version, and you can download this template. If you subscribe to my newsletter down below in the description of this video, you're gonna receive an email as a reply that is gonna contain links to the downloads of my template. This, when I say this template, it doesn't include the libraries I use. You're just gonna receive an empty template with the mixer already routed, and you just have to rename your tracks, and you already have your X-Y-Z controller set up, and so that is gonna save you the trouble of having to create all the controllers and whatever. So yeah, if you're interested in my template, subscribe to my newsletter down below, link down below, and you're gonna get it there. And that's it for this tutorial. I hope it was helpful for those of you who use FL Studio. If you're wondering if there is a way to do this in Cubase or Logic or what have you, I guess so. I've never used those DAWs so much, but I guess controllers are a universal thing. Now, you might probably not have like formulas like this or whatever, but the same concept can be applied. If you do the parallel reverb and then you link your controllers to the volume of the sends, the volume of the links, whatever, as I explained you here, you're gonna get the same effect in Logic or whatever. But yeah, that's all for this tutorial. And subscribe if you want to see more tutorials from me. Leave a like and subscribe to the newsletter down below if you want to get my template in your email address. That's all for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.